If a writer has 3 ideas, how do they know which one to choose?
Oh, well, I think it depends on sort of what they want out of the writing project, right? So I think there are a few criteria you can look to, and it's a really personal decision. I also think you don't ever have to throw an idea away. If you have 3 that you want to write, that means you're really just choosing which one you're going to write next, and then you can always have the other 2 on deck, right? I personally think that you should, sort of gauge the concept and make sure that each idea you're weighing is a strong enough idea to be a screenplay. That's the first thing. But if all that's equal, I think you should look at what you want to get out of the project. So is it helping you, learn a new skill in your writing kind of toolkit? Is it helping you advance your career in a particular way? Is it, filling out your portfolio of writing samples? So that is helpful to kind of gauge, what do I want this to do for me, so that you're not, no writing is wasted. It's not wasted time, but so that you're getting the most out of the project that you're going to write. And then also, if you know the ending, I think that that's very helpful, because that, sometimes if you start a writing project without knowing the ending, that can be a longer, more frustrating process to outline that. But if you kind of, how this story ends, the outlining of it, the figuring out kind of how the plot progresses, all the steps in the plot and everything, that's a little bit easier because you know what destination you're headed towards.
So that's interesting. When you said that you've actually outlined for people once you see their finished script, if you see someone who's hung up on the ending, do you get them to that point and then say, okay, now, I realize you're not figuring out the ending for them, but do you outline up until that point and then maybe that helps them through it?
Well, if I'm making an outline from a finished draft that someone's given me to read, I outline exactly what they have in the draft. So if their ending isn't working or if it isn't complete, and I have read scripts like that, I will outline exactly what they have, and then we'll talk about what's missing here. Is that the ending is totally gone and you need to figure out what that is, or is it just that you've sort of wrapped up the plot, but it's really not complete or resolving things as it needs to. So that's kind of just a normal day in kind of doing the script consults. Is a lot of times the ending needs work, so we'll just talk about how can we strengthen that.
Sure, but that sounds really helpful, just again, as it's easier for someone to come in and organize someone's space than if you have all these personal mementos and oh, I can't get rid of this, I can't get rid of that, oh, my grandmother gave me this. But if the organizer comes in and says, how about we put this over here, it sounds like it's much easier.
Yeah, and I think that that's such a good analogy, because that is probably what it feels like as well. If you've written a draft and you're like, here are the scenes that I love and I want them to be in there, but something about it isn't working, there is that feeling of I'm attached to these things, but I don't know how to organize them in a way that they need to in order for it to kind of make sense for everyone else as well,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And then you open the closet door and everything falls.
Yes.
And hence the screenplay might be really jumbled, and if we make sense to the viewer or the reader.
Yeah. And when I go in there, it's I can sort of outline based on what they already have, and then we can talk about, okay, so here's what we have so far, and then here's what the third act needs to do. Here's, how it needs to resolve the plot and wrap up character arc and all that stuff. So what are we missing? And then we can kind of fill in the holes,
What is brain dump?
Oh, that's just something, I'm sure other people use it in different ways, but it's something that I think is a useful exercise to do at the beginning of sort of your story breaking process. When you come up with an idea and you haven't really done much to shape it yet, I think it's really useful to just sort of sit down and write down everything you know about that idea. Because you end up capturing stuff that you maybe didn't realize you knew about it or thought about it. And then you also sort of end up capturing what you love about that idea when you're in that moment of still being in love with it. So that later on when you're writing the script and you inevitably get to that frustrating part where you get stuck or you don't know what happens next and you are feeling why did I start writing this? You can kind of go back to that brain dump and remember what made me fall in love with this idea to begin with? Or what was it about this idea that, inspired me? How did I want people to feel? What were my hopes and aspirations for this project, before I started down the long road of actually writing it. So, yeah.
So if I have, let's say, a notebook, and it's my idea for this movie or this character, I'm just kind of like, this is my notebook where I'm going to put the good, the bad, and the ugly about this character, the story, anything I can think of.
Yeah, and I think it's probably different for every project and for every writer, like what comes to mind. I think it's useful to give yourself a little bit of structure, some parameters around the brain dump, but really it should be whatever you know about your project at that point in time. So I just think, write down anything that, where the idea came from, anything that inspires you about the idea, or how do you see this finished movie? Like what other movies would it be like? What's the soundtrack sound like? Are there any songs that give you that feeling that you want the movie to have? Talking about characters for sure, like who's the main character, if you know that. What's that character like? What kind of relationships does that character have? Who are the people in his or her life? Kind of anything that you sort of come to the table with when you're just getting, inspired by that idea, like just starting to sort of gather everything that you know about it that you're going to start shaping into the story eventually. Like, because, at the beginning, it's like you have a jumble of ideas, I think. You have, oh, this would be a great scene, or, oh, I think it ends like this maybe with this final shot. I don't know how we get there, but it's them riding off into the sunset. Or, I don't know who this character is, but I think that there's a guy who, had this background or has this, affectation, and I wonder how he got to be that way. And so it's just a way for you to start to gather kind of like all of those little tidbits that you think might belong to this story, put them all in one place so that you don't have that feeling of like, that nervous feeling of like, oh, I'm going to forget this idea and I don't know where it goes yet. And so you're all stressed out about trying to work it into the story. You can put it all in one place and just hold it there so that as you're working through kind of that development process, you can always go back to it and reference it, come up with those ideas that you had at one time that maybe you'd forgotten about.
So let's suppose I was Eric Roth and I thought of this idea for this Forrest Gump character, or based on a book, whatever. And I thought, okay, here's my notebook with Forrest in it. And so Southern town, loving mom, definitely health problems with his legs, different things, and then meets Jenny, meets Bubba, all these different things, meets Captain Dan, different fights, different things, and his goal of being sort of this theme through his life of being in like these interesting places at the right time and helping people. He's almost like a helper.
Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of like getting it out. This is Forrest. There wasn't really anything bad about him, but these are some of the things that make up this Forrest character.
Yeah, and hopefully, if you're working on that project or you were inspired enough to kind of sit down and start to gather your thoughts, hopefully there's something about who that character is that you really like, right? Or that interests you at least. And so those are the things that I think you should focus on, because those are going to be the things that sort of help you later on in the story, like having those touchstones of like, oh yeah, I remember I really wanted this character to have this particular feeling, or to maybe have this particular arc, to learn this lesson across this story. So yeah, I don't even know if you know that much about your story, it's great, and write it all down, but you don't even have to try to, shape it in the brain dump process. I think I wouldn't put pressure on yourself to try to come up with like, oh, this is first act stuff and this is, where the story goes from there. It's just kind of whatever sparks your interest when you think about that particular idea. And I always like the sort of prompts or questions you ask yourself about like, how do I see this in its finished form? Even if it's not specifics, but it's like, how do I want people to feel when they see it? Or, what does the soundtrack sound like is a good one, because it's like, what feelings does it give you when you hear the, music, or what music makes you think of this idea or make you feel the way this idea makes you feel? And then I also, one other thing that I think is really helpful to do in the kind of brain dump process is think about what the story means to you. Because that helps you start to narrow in on the theme of the story, which I think is one of those things that like it really intimidates a lot of writers. It feels like, oh, I have to come up with some big profound statement. But really you're just trying to come up with like what does it mean to you, right? Like what's the sort of takeaway message or, you know, big idea that this story imparts? And that can be really daunting and intimidating. So if you do it in the brain dump process where you're just sort of free flowing and brainstorming, it gives you kind of a pressure-free environment to kind of think about like, what does the story mean? Like what kind of lesson would this character learn? Or what kind of lesson could this experience teach someone, you know? And what's the story about for me? Like what does it sort of mean to me, you know, inside that I kind of want to get at or explore in the story?
Okay, so I wouldn't necessarily know maybe all of these things when I mentioned Lieutenant Dan and these things. I would just know that it's a character, maybe the odds were kind of stacked against him, but he didn't really have a mean streak in him. He didn't need to get revenge on people.
Yeah.
Or maybe what had been done to him, or he was still just a kind-hearted guy.
Yeah, and I think maybe if you were developing that story idea, right, in the brain dump process, you might not know the specifics about those other characters, but you might say, okay, I have this main character that I'm really interested in. I think his name's Forrest Gump, and he's this type of guy, right? He's such a kind person. He doesn't have a mean bone in his body. And the kinds of people that he could run into that would create conflict and help him kind of move through the story might be, you know, someone who he's in love with who doesn't reciprocate, right? And so he has to contend with that set of emotions. Maybe he has kind of a mentor character that he meets in the unlikely place of in the military. It's been a long time since I saw that movie, so I don't remember if Dan is the mentor, but maybe he meets somebody who's very gruff and sort of the opposite of him personality-wise, right? Maybe he meets Bubba, who in some ways is similar, like sort of innocent and kind of sees the world in a particular way. And so by pairing up with that person, you know, these are the kinds of things that he might experience or lessons that he might learn or situations he might find himself in, you know?